I want to start with a number, and honestly, it should probably scare you. A major report looking at enterprise AI found that about 95% of generative AI pilots, well, they aren't producing any measurable business impact.
And we're not talking less than expected or, it's still early days. We're talking almost nothing.
So that begs a pretty big question, right? If AI isn't actually paying off, then why on earth are we building a whole economy around it? And what happens when the money finally has to face the music?
We're going to break this down into 3 parts. First up, the wall. We'll look at why AI is hitting some serious limits that all the hype in the world can't fix. Then, the winter, which is what happens when the investors, stop funding the dream. And finally, the relics. This is the weird part. What's actually left standing after a bubble like this pops? And just to be clear, this isn't investing advice. Think of it more like an anatomy lesson. Okay, so let's dive in. The simplest way to think about it is this. A bubble forms when belief just grows way faster than actual results. And right now, the results for AI are, well, they're a bit uneven, to put it mildly.
You know that 95% number we started with? It's so important because it points to something a little uncomfortable. The real problem, the real bottleneck. It isn't the AI model itself. Nope, it's everything else that has to happen around the model. We're talking data access, compliance, security, actually changing how people work to integrate it. And maybe the biggest one, most companies don't really have a clear goal for what they even want to automate. So if all these pilots are failing, where is all this money actually going?
Well, it's going into infrastructure. It's not going into apps or cool new software products. It's going into the really heavy stuff, data centers, chips, and just massive amounts of electricity. And that brings us to a whole other wall, a literal, physical one.
See, here's the thing you gotta understand. AI doesn't scale like a social media app. It's not just code. It scales like heavy industry. Think steel mills, railroads, power plants. And right at that point, this story stops being just tech news, and it becomes a story about grid politics.
I mean, just look at what's happening down in Georgia. You've got state regulators approving a massive expansion of power generation just for new data centers. That's not a software trend anymore. That's a country physically reshaping its landscape.
So that's the wall we're talking about. You've got AI that can't prove it's profitable fast enough. But on the other hand, you have this infrastructure being built at a breakneck, historic pace. The whole thing becomes this high-stakes race between profits and patience. And eventually, patience runs out. And when that happens, well, we get what every single hype cycle eventually gives us.
Which brings us to Chapter 2, the winter. Look, an AI winter doesn't start because the tech stops working. It starts when the money stops believing. And, as we look towards the end of 2025, that fear, it's not so subtle anymore.
I mean, when a major investment firm like Bridgewater starts calling this whole phase dangerous, they're not saying the AI is junk. What they are saying is that the way this whole thing is being financed, it's starting to look incredibly fragile. So, what does that fragility actually look like in the AI world? Well, it looks like a ton of external capital. It looks like debt. And it looks like these absolutely massive funding rounds.
Basically, you've got all these companies just racing to lock in their access to computing power before that window of opportunity slams shut. And all of this frantic racing creates this really weird kind of feedback loop.
It's like the industry is funding itself so it can buy from itself just to justify getting more funding to do it all over again.
And when you see a loop like that playing out, you're not really watching genuine market demand anymore. You're just watching pure momentum. And yeah, momentum is powerful for sure, but it is not the same thing as profit. So let's zoom out for a second here.
All this deal-making for data centers, it's hitting all-time highs. And that's so important because it tells you what this boom really is. It is a full-on land rush, but not for oil and not for gold. It's a land rush for megawatts.
And what happens during a land rush? People build too much. It happens every single time because all the incentives are rewarding speed, not accuracy. And that brings us to maybe the clearest signal that we're in a bubble. Even AI's biggest champions, the people building it, are starting to say the quiet part out loud.
When the very people selling you on this amazing future start admitting that the market is overheating, that doesn't mean the future they're promising is fake. It just means the timeline is. So, if that AI winter does hit, what's actually going to survive? And that takes us to our final chapter, the relics. Because here's the big twist in all of this. If the AI bubble pops, the data centers don't just disappear. The power plants don't unbuild themselves. All that fiber optic cable, it stays right there in the ground.
The world has already been permanently shaped by this boom.
So the real story isn't that AI just vanishes. It's about what we're all left living with inside this new world. You could call it the age of relic AI, where we have these incredibly powerful models, but they're not improving anymore at that crazy speed that justified all that spending in the first place.
And really, you don't need to look at science fiction to see how this could happen. It happens when the economy itself gets hooked on the build-out. Think about it. If all your GDP growth is coming from just building the infrastructure, then stopping feels like trying to jump off a speeding treadmill, even if that treadmill is totally exhausting you.
And that's the trap right there. The bubble can pop, and we could just keep building anyway. Not because it makes any money, but because it's become politically and economically just too painful to stop. So now try to picture what that afterworld looks like. A world where the best AI models are out there, but only a handful of organizations can actually afford to train new ones. Most companies, they're just stuck using the same few models for years and years. Not because they're perfect, but just because they're available. And this is where the story gets a little bit darker.
Okay, so while the progress on the AI models themselves is basically frozen, the internet itself is still changing. You've got bots generating traffic, AI generating content, and the whole web just gets noisier and noisier than it's ever been. Now, what happens if the next generation of AI models has to train on all that noise? Well, you get this recursive loop. It's like making a copy of a copy of a copy until the original signal, the original truth, just thins out completely. So you see, the aftermath isn't just about the economy, it's informational. It's about knowledge itself. A civilization can definitely survive a market crash. We've done it before. But can it survive in a world where truth becomes a luxury good, something expensive, while cheap, synthetic content is absolutely infinite? That's the relic future. It's not extinction, and it's not some utopia. It's just a long, strange plateau.
So, the big question, is AI a bubble? Well, maybe. Or maybe it's something even weirder, a truly powerful technology that's been wrapped up in a completely unrealistic story, driving an infrastructure build-out so massive that it reshapes our world no matter what happens. If the boom actually delivers on its promises, we get a new foundation for the entire economy. But if the boom collapses, we still get the foundation. We just don't get that magnificent cathedral we were promised on top of it.
And that is what comes after. A world that has been built for incredible artificial minds that we may or may not actually be able to afford.